Welcome back to our Minnesota bound trip. This episode, we pretty much spend the whole time in North Dakota. On our trip back in 2021, we did stop at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. We spent most of the time up in the North Unit. It just so happened that our travel day kind of ended about where the South Unit is, so we decided to stay at the South Unit of Theodore Roosevelt National Park for the night at Cottonwood Campground. We had tried to stay there on our initial trip, but the campground was full and we weren't able to stay there. That's why we ended up in the North Unit. So this time we actually stayed in the South Unit. I know it's barren, but I still love the terrain and geography around this area. It may be barren, but I still find it very beautiful. This is one place that it's very regular to see buffalo. And we only spent the night there, but this is what we woke up to the next morning. Buffalo were literally in our camp. It is amazing how big they can get. And they may look slow, but they can be very, very fast. And of course, we're trying to break down and get the trailer hooked back up and get everything ready to go and take off to our next stop. And a couple buffalo were deciding to have a little fun and kind of play fight each other. I'm pretty sure it wasn't anything serious, but it was spectacular to watch, but nervous at the same time because, again, we're trying to put things in the truck, take down our outside items on the trailer, and leave, and we're a little concerned about getting out because we don't want to draw attention to ourselves because how close they were. But it was still magnificent to watch them as they pushed each other around. We've come to really like the Theodore Roosevelt National Park area and would be more than happy to come back if the Lord wills it. And when you got a scratch, you need to itch it. And this guy was using the table there as his scratching post. One of the things I think is kind of neat going through North Dakota is they are really big on these metal sculptures. That is geese in flight. And as we're driving down the highway, you could see several of them. Way out there in the distance, in front of that hill, you can see Salem Sue, the largest Holstein cow. It's a huge fiberglass Holstein cow on the side of the highway. And if you look at the trees as we come down here, you can see that Sandy, the Sandhill Crane, supposedly the world's largest Sandhill Crane. And of course, the world's largest buffalo. We stopped at the buffalo last trip, but looking at satellite images, a couple of those other places just don't look like there's spots to turn the trailer around, so we didn't go there. Then it was on to Fort Abraham Lincoln. This was actually the campground we wanted to stay at when we initially did our trip in 2021, but the campground was completely full. With its popularity, we were a little concerned about actually being able to stop there even this time of year. So this is the only place on this trip that we made reservations. And when we got there, we were the only trailer, only campers in the entire campground. It was rather interesting. But so this is a site of Fort Abraham Lincoln. This fort was actually started in June of 1872, and at that time it was called Fort McKean. And then in November of 1872 it was renamed Fort Abraham Lincoln. At one point, the fort had 78 permanent wooden structures on site. In 1873, the 7th Cavalry moved to the fort, and the post commander at that time was none other than Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. This is the fort that the 7th Cavalry left on their way to the Little Bighorn in 1876. So this is the commander's house. It's been nicknamed the Custer House. It was actually built in 1989. It's a replica. One of the things is once this fort was decommissioned in 1891 and abandoned, the town folk in the area came in and took pretty much every single building down for the wood and the nails and the building materials so they could build things in town. So when this was turned into a park, it was actually signed over in 1907 by Theodore Roosevelt, who was the president at the time, and he signed the deed over for the state parks in North Dakota for the land. And then in 1934, the Civilian Conservation Corps, I don't know why I have such a difficulty time saying that, came in 1934, and they built the commissary, which is the first building we saw. That's the commissary there. This is the barracks, and they built a granary and the visitor center. And what we'll see a little bit later is they also built On-A-Slant village, which was an old Mandan village. The time of year we were there, everything was closed up. I've seen video and pictures of this fort in the middle of summertime, and they'll have soldiers' equipment and uniforms and tack and other things there in the barracks, kind of showing you more of what it was like at that time. It is kind of funny for me being in the military and looking at the barracks. Not a lot has changed. We didn't have wood floors when I was in, but it's a big, empty, single room with cots. So it is still neat to see the buildings, even though they weren't open, even though there weren't role players there. And then we went to the visitor center. This is the visitor center and museum. And this building was built in 1934 by the CCC. It was a really well done museum, really kind of centering on the Mandan village. And that model you see there is they've done archaeological digs in the area, and I want to say that there was something like 70 different earthen huts that were built here in the area. Now, this was a big Mandan village all the way up to 1781 when a smallpox epidemic hit the area, and it decimated that village so bad that they actually abandoned it for health reasons and started another small village to the north of this one. And that new village is where Lewis and Clark met up with the Mandans. They have a lot of artifacts, pottery, tools, arrowheads, Indian clothing. Just amazing how adept they were at building things out of available materials. And you look at the pottery, and oftentimes we think that they lived hundreds of years ago. They weren't very sophisticated, but you look at their pottery, it's finely detailed, very artistic. It's not the fancy stuff we have nowadays, but they used what was available, and they were able to make things that were not only functional but very beautiful and just well done. It takes a lot of ingenuity to do those kinds of things. And they went through a lot of different aspects of the villages and the effects that Lewis and Clark had when they came through in 1804. And what the area would have been like prior to the fort even coming into being. I think it was a very well done museum with a lot of artifacts and a lot of good information about the area and its history, which was a lot of fun to look at. There's an old kind of map drawing of the old Fort Abraham Lincoln. The lighting wasn't the greatest, so you can't really read the detailed information about the buildings, but the fort did expand over quite a big area. There was another section of the fort where some of the infantry was actually stationed, which was further away from the cavalry buildings that we had walked through. And that area was still blocked by snow on the road, so we weren't able to go out there to see any of that. But I believe they have a couple of old block houses rebuilt out there to show you what it was like back in the day. And of course they have markers where the old buildings used to be. But, and they had some good information on the fort and its impact on the area, and of course the fateful trip of George Custer and his 7th Cavalry troops going to Little Bighorn. There's an old picture of what the fort looked like. And according to the caption next to it, is that picture was taken in 1857. No, it can't be. 1875. My mistake. 1875 is when that picture was taken. So that fort was only 3 years old at the time. And then just outside the visitor center, they have this walkway over a ravine that takes you to On-A-Slant village. And they've done excavation, and from what they're reporting as those buildings that they have rebuilt out there at On-A-Slant, they did archaeological digs in the area prior to, and those are the proper size and placement of several of the buildings, the old huts that were there prior to the fort ever coming into being. Then one of the downfalls of traveling this time of year is the buildings weren't open. You didn't have reenactors out there that could answer questions and show you more detail about what's going on and whatnot. And of course, there were several things that we had to look at weather. In fact, we were here at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and we were supposed to leave a day earlier than we did, but we were looking at the weather, and a snowstorm was supposed to be coming through with below freezing temperatures, so we decided to stay here at the fort one more day. And from the, for lack of a better word, carnage along the interstate on our way into Minnesota, it was a very good thing that we did not drive on the highway. There was a jackknife semi they were in the process of pulling out of the middle meridian, and marks in the snow everywhere indicating slide-offs, rollovers. It was a very smart thing for us to stay another night, but it was an enjoyable stay, and we learned a lot, and I'm glad we were able to come back here since we missed it on our trip in 2021. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for coming along.